this is a continuation of the interview with Mrs. J.O. Nick. You were talking about the Lynch's building?
Yes, well, they got the rock at the quarry out at Dawson and hauled it in here, and it was 2 stories and a full basement. And C.B. Lynch and Bob had owned, Bob had come up here to work on the Hostel Ranch, and he and his brother were in business in a frame building, but they moved it over a lot, and Bob, he built a rock building. And Andy Stokes, who was later assessor in Tulsa, he and his wife came over from Claremore and opened up an ice cream parlor in the basement. And they had a windmill out the side on First Street with a water tank for the horses. And upstairs was really kind of like the civic center. So they had large meetings and all kinds of gatherings met up there in that upstairs. It had an outside entrance and had an outside entrance to the basement. And it had all kinds of everything from sewing machines to ribbon. And the people, the dealers in those days would go out with a wagon and see the countryside among the Indians and the white settlers, and they'd haul organs and sewing machines to sell. They'd go out and just peddle them. And we had pack peddlers coming through the country, and they had to have a license, and these merchants had to have a license. They had to get a permit from the Creek Nation to open a store, and an Indian white man couldn't work for an Indian without a permit, a written permit. They were to raise some of the money.
Could you tell a little about beyond this first store, the Lynch store was the first store. Tell a little about what followed the Lynch store in the building of Tulsa.
The next rock building was the Libby Barn. It was, I thought it was called a rock barn. They had badger fights and everything else there when they weren't. But they had lots of horses.
What about the badger fights?
Well, they advertised those, but they said in the paper, and they said that leave your guns at home. And the Indians were great horse racers. They always had nice horse pulling. This man keeps walking back and forth. But anyway, the doctors and the people, restaurants that could afford them, they brought in Kentucky-bred horses. They had wonderful horses. And a pioneer cattleman later bought that rock building, and it was built in the beginning by Barry Hogan. And just after he sold it, he was boarding 30 fine horses down in the basement. And the fire marshal, Chief Alder, gave him some worn-out rubber hose to make treads on the ramp so that it could take the horses down the ramp. And they caught fire and burned up 30 of those fine horses.
Tell a little about the badger fight.
Well, I didn't see those.
Oh, I know you did. I presume, though, that you have done some research on it.
Well, not to any great extent. The next building was the cotton gin, and his first was a mill where a man out southeast had a lot of corn, and he had no way to grind it, so he established a corn grinding mill on out further on West First Street. And some enterprising man in the mill, he hooked up a rig to have a bathhouse hooked up to the boiler, and the ladies could go during the week, but Saturday night was men's day, and they buy tickets for it. It was $4 for $1, I think. So,
can you tell me more about that?
well, then it was later made into flour mill, and of course later we had other mills, and we had stockyards built. The town developed.
What about the paving? When did that begin to take place? What happened there?
I don't know if they used Montgomery Ward catalogs and corn cobs for a long time, but I really just offhand started looking at my notes. I don't remember when the first paving went in, but it was here, some of it, when I came in 1910, but West Edison, I did possibilities now, and out there wasn't paved. But when I came down in 1910, the 1000 block on South Main was where my parents were living, and we had to walk out there, and we thought it was terribly far out, and the thing to see then was the new Midland Valley Depot, and we just walked all over town. My brother took me around, and then a farmer from Kansas came down on looked around South Peoria about 21st Street, and visited his sister here, and he wanted to buy a farm, but he said 31st and South Peoria was just too far out. He wasn't interested.
How did you use the Central Catalog? Did you use the Phil catalog?
Well, the ladies, when they crossed the street, they'd tear the pages out, and they'd put it down and step, and then they'd put another one down and step to get across the street to the stores, because it was just very muddy. In fact, old Dr. Wilson, the first dentist here, he got as far as Tulsa from up the road, I believe it was Ocaleta. Anyway, he was up there, he was traveling through the country, had his dental equipment with him in his buggy, and he got here and he couldn't get any farther, so he had to stay to spring, so he never did leave.
That's how it happened to Shadow and Tulsa. What was he going to?
Oh, he was just hunting a location, and he was traveling around, but when he got this far, he couldn't make it any farther. It's too muddy.
You think that's how Tulsa got settled? He couldn't get any money?
That's how Dr. Wilson stayed. I interviewed him. See, I've interviewed a lot of these old pioneers.
Is that how your printing plant got started?
No, we came in on the railroad.
Who are some of the people you interviewed?
Oh, I don't know. It's a long list of them. I interviewed a lot of the Cherokees and the Osages, and Dr. Clinton and Dr. Wilson, the dentist, and the McBurney family, and then of course for this book I interviewed many. It took me a year, and I wrote from coast to coast. The Methodist Church didn't have a single photograph in their files when I started to write that book. I wrote to nursing homes and business places and bishops and all over the country. But down here in Tulsa, I've interviewed a lot of early photographers and a lot of the pioneer people. Heffelfingers and Lynches and Perryman and Mrs. Lindsay. I own Mrs. Lindsay's entire collection. The Memorial Association at Oklahoma City is considering buying it. And I get ready to sell it.
Do you have any funny stories in your book that you can tell?
Well, I don't know right now. There's so much in it that I hadn't thought about that before I came in.
When do you open your book?
Well, I hope to have it ready, because I asked an extension of time. I hope to have it out in the spring.
I want to read my card and start to come down. I don't know if I'm going to get
Oh, well, I've had a lot of people, and a lot of the, you asked me about the Porters were some other people I interviewed. You see, Bill Porter, he keeps nagging me, why don't we keep getting all tired waiting on you on that. But his grandfather was a principal key for the case just before Cathedral.
What's the funniest story you have in the book? used to use?
Oh, I just don't know. I can't think of, I can't think of any.
There must be something funny.
Well, one was when I think I was a Catholic man, a priest, was going to a meeting down in the Fort Gibson West area, and he was late going, and he had his accoutrements with him to conduct this Catholic service when he got there, and so they assigned the job of driving him over to the meeting to a little boy or youngster, and he was so worried about these accoutrements that he had that somebody would waylay them and rob them, and he kept talking about it, and this lad said, "Don't worry, sir," he said, "there is no white man within 50 miles. In other words, the Indians wouldn't bother him.
This gets into, I think, the basic character of the Indian's honesty, which has been. Do you have any other examples that would portray the basic honesty that was attributed, and I assume correctly, to the tribal Indians? Can you think of any other stories along that line?
Well, of course, it's the Indian agent always said that if an Indian gave his word, it was good. I mean, he always, even some of the hostile Creeks, which were the Upper Creeks, and created the Civil War, which drove the other Creeks out here. They always said if they gave their word, they kept.
Do you have any personal examples, any personal experience that might be of this area?
You mean about honesty?
Yes, or in any other area that might reflect the personality, character, or otherwise of the Indian.
Well, this Lionel Ramsey that I'm take to do a juvenile on, as I use my can't turn loose the collection right now. Her ambition was to go to college, the way to school. Of course, all the children showed ability. If it was possible, they were sent to the States to school. And I made a trip to North Missouri last fall and to see the college. So this Indian orphan girl was sent to by the missionaries from Tallahassee Creek Mission School. And her ambition had always been to go to school and acquire an education and come back and help her people. And her father died at Fort Gibson in the Civil War, and her mother they called her a medicine woman. That was a misnomer as far as reality. She just went around when people were sick and used the herbs and the medicines of pain. She didn't intimate that she had any powers at all, not like the medicine man we hear about. And she died when Lana was about 13, so she was free to go to school, and she went to the Synopsis College. I was up there and had the material from there putting my book on her. And she graduated then from Hillsborough College in Ohio, and they didn't think a bachelor's degree should be given to a girl, and they didn't have, so they created a master's degree for her. Well, she came back. She married this man that built the rock building, this Colonel Livingston, known as Lila Denton, and she's in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, by the way. And she probably did more than any other. I'm sure she did more than any Indian woman for the upbuilding of Tulsa. She organized There was very few things that were organized in Tulsa that she didn't have a hand in, from the Women's Christian Campus Union to the Indian Women's Club to the civic affairs to the welfare, getting a matron appointed, and her allotment, 40 acres of it, was down here in southwest Tulsa, about 89 blocks from here. And then she had the other part of her allotment. An Indian could take their allotment. They could have 40 acres for a homestead which they couldn't sell, and then the rest of it they could take somewhere else. And her others were out at where the Keystone Lake is now, on the Cimarron. And anyway, and she taught she taught in the first private school in Tulsa. I have one of the chairs that's in her husband bought in my collection in the first school, and they wandered in the public school she taught. And she taught at Osmorga in the council house, her substituted for Alice Robinson, and for a little church out Tulsa and Broken Arrow called the White Church, which is still in existence. And she's kin to the Perryman in the 40s. No, she died in 46. She's a personal friend of mine. And I purchased her material. I tried to keep everything in Oklahoma of hers. I purchased one from the man in Oklahoma, a whole bunch. And then I've acquired others from different estates where they had letters and so forth. But that's just typical of, she was an outstanding woman in that way. Her father was a Cherokee, her mother was a Creek, and of course the children always went on the roles of their mother. All the time did. I mean, it was a matriarchal line.
How did you become interested in writing?
Oh, I started writing, I did 30 years ago. I wrote short pieces, and I've written for the national magazines, and I've written about 80 illustrated historical features. Some of them not. I've written for Gilbert and Tulsa papers, and Farmer Stockman, and Oklahoma Today, and others. Poultry journals. I was on the staff writer for the Christian Woman in Wichita during World War II. My husband was ill for 2 years, and I run the shop. My son was in the submarine service, so I've had a pretty active career.
Now, what books have you had published? You mentioned you have your message prayers, you have your Ring on Website.
But my son Houston is ready, but it wasn't published. I haven't tried to yet. I had the location, which has been very controversial. The legislature's been trying to establish a marker, but they can't agree on it. I've got it all figured out in a legal description. But the man that owns the property wouldn't let him put it off the main road. They can't get it off the property. But my husband and I were both listed in Who's Who in Tulsa in 65, and I'm in Who's Who in American Women, and also in the Dictionary of International Biography in London for my research. Of course, I was quite active in the Federation Women's Club for years. I was 15 years for the first district. I was publicity chairman, and then in 48 to 50, I was also the state publicity chairman, and I won the New York Herald and Tribune award for the best published in the state that year. And then I wrote a news release for 2 years, once a month, for the UNAD at Norman. I was asked to come and get it, but I didn't do it. I just made it.
How many pictures do you have in the book?
About 800. And I have we have a nice library. My husband's library and mine are different. Mine's Southwest and Indians, and his is the World Wars and the generals and the presidents.
How many, your husband died?
About a year and a half ago. I have one son and one daughter, and 8 great-grandchildren.
8 great-grandchildren.
Mhm.
How many of you sisters will be in the world?
Well, of course, I'd be up pretty much the editor, but I hope about 500 or something like that or so. That what same name?
I might check and see how if you have a problem. I thought about a family, yeah, just on a vision, you know.
Well, my son was in the submarine service on the Sea Dog for 4 years during World War II, and my daughter is married and raised in Katigan, Kansas, and she has 8 grandchildren. I just have 5. So I went up to see my Grace last fall, and I took a busman's holiday because I report every 2 weeks for the Forest Review in Chicago, and I visited the forest shops there and found one that had been in existence in the family since the Civil War children. And my grandson worked for the Bell Publishing Company there, and so that was a lot of fun going through that thing. He's part owner there. And then I went to St. Louis, and I went down to the Mississippi River to visit where Lewis and Clark came back, replica of their canoes there when I came back from the Clark expedition. And the old Soto 910 of the two fur trading posts that had the shortest furs.
What years did this happen in Tulsa since you've been here since 1950?
Oh, the thing I've looked forward to for years and years was the fortification.
You bet you were very
Oh, I know. It was such a big crowd, and I knew I'd have to walk so far. So my son took me out early the next morning because I wanted to view it and take some pictures and see the the boat. And but this Lila Lindsay I was telling you about, she was on the National Rivers and Harbors committee from the government, and I've been hearing about that deal for all these years, and it's been my ambition to live to see that. That was the highlight for me in Tulsa.
How about traveling like that?
Well, that was a great deal, and everybody but us, I think, had a dance that night. But when I was visiting, and everybody was pulling their coffee cup and getting ready to have a dance. That really was something because, of course, when I first came to Tulsa, I had this daughter was 2 years old, and we had to save the ice strips in the ice box to bathe the babies in, It was so muddy, and of course we had to see the Creek Indians were out here beside springs, and I had these 3 springs which people, after the Indians left there, people sold bottled water. A man bought up that spring, 2 springs. Town thing that savings over now, and so everybody bought bottled water, 5-gallon jugs.
How about the oil? You were here during the period of the big oil company.
Glen Pool.
You weren't here when Glen Pool covered.
No, I was here in Can, and I might tell you a little odd thing that happened when the city service was building their big building down here. I knew that they bought the ground where there had been an old gas well. So I got in touch with them and told them it was there and they better watch out for it. So they sent a man down to my office and he said, could you locate it? And I said, well, I know the people's name who lived within a certain few feet of it if you get the abstract out. So anyway, I located within 50 feet, and that's why it was carried on the United Press. But they kept me informed every few days as to how far down they were when they hit the first top of the wooden plug. It was just an old, almost decayed plug, and they placed it in down by 500 feet. And then when the Oklahoma National bought this place on West 3rd Street for the build that big heating and cooling unit. I called and told them they'd bought a cemetery, the first Tulsa cemetery. So they, next day, they, in the legal news, they had, if anybody had graves there, they would be careful and rebury them, and they buried some. Yeah, it's in Boston. Bank of Commerce is in that now, and that's one of the early banks. And then where the Fourth National Bank is now, they're right on top of where there used to be a windmill. Up here at Fourth and Mississippi, there it is. Oh, what was there? Well, they just houses. Just houses, and the urban renewal took them down. Everybody was mad, of course. Just like that lady on television at noon that's back east, that she won't move out of her house. But, of course, most of them did. Oh, that was all just to build up houses.
Can you think of any other buildings in town or landmark buildings that are over things that might have been facilities?
Well, in a building now that is standing at about 2 doors north of 2nd Street, if they haven't torn it down since I saw it years ago, there's a city water rail that looks down into my closet, I'm told. I didn't see it, but one of my pioneer friends told me that's over a water rail. And it hasn't been filled up. Of course, some of the water wells have been filled up.
I thought they said
Oh no, they plugged it up, but it wasn't well plugged. It just had an old piece of board in it. And in the early days, when that thing was first opened up, everybody around kind of knew about it, but I don't think anybody, not everybody either, but several did. But they had a pipe on it with a tin can over it, and when people would be coming to town, they'd take them down there to show them and take the can off and turn the valve and light it, and scare everybody to death. It was quite a deal. And somebody coming in from the Osage saw one night, and they thought the town was on fire.
You've given me a lot of your work let's take some of the leaders
May I ask you? Oh, yes, come on. And I was going to ask you what happened to all this stuff.
Well, this of course was that's why I was thinking you come to a meeting for community management. But of course, one thing is that of course this is good research material for the future, all of us at home. That maybe used in many years.
But I'm afraid that the new deposit.
Your comment across the side is on the construction college, but in addition, is that in the audio visual area where we're putting together programs, and I have this one, which is called Tulsa tonight, and this starts.
Is that the one there on Brown Ford picture?
This one has that whole picture. And it starts
not all of them.
but the real key to this, I'm going to send this off to council.
I didn't know in place, but I didn't know anything in terms of getting that sort of thing. He was really much like that. I didn't place in where he was, but I didn't know in place.
We are among the leaders in Tulsa, so you can think you know personally pretty well.
Oh, I knew the name of it.
I can tell you that. Just as you knew things that you might think about.
Well, I knew them when they had the little store down on 1st Street.
That was the first thing. What about the first one?
Well, when I first stopped there, they had the little baskets that you they first put the money in and pulled a little string and then went up to Upper Region Zone where you get your change. And it just had all kinds of merchandise, and they were all just on, it was on one floor. I mean, piece goods and dress goods, and of course they were in business up until just last year. They had a business. I knew Lorella real well. She just died about 2 months ago.
Who else among you are early leaders of Tulsa did you know? Do you know any of you all families in Tulsa?
Well, let's see. It's been so long since it came. I knew it particularly the people in the Kiwanis Club and the Chamber of Commerce, and the first president was Johnny Woodard, a lawyer in the Kiwanis Club, and of course everybody in the printing industry, because in those days you had picnics and dinners and got together. They don't do that anymore, you know.
What about those people of junior who were leaders in the building of Tulsa? Who stand up for you?
Dr. Fred Clinton. Well, he was one of the early doctors, and he was the one that brought in the red salt oil, well, the first one, and he had the first hospital, he and Dr. Ziegler, and it was on West 5th Street, about Lawton, where the road turn went down towards the bridge. Of course, that's all changed now. I did a piece of story on that and had a picture of it, paper type years ago. And he built the first fireproof building. I believe it was at that church in Boston. They moved the house off and down at 16th in Denver, and when they were tearing it down, I did a story on that. I wrote about this. There's several stories, probably 8 or 9 stories.
Can you talk about him as a personality?
Yes, he is a large man, very imposing, and he was very busy. He was at one of the railroad positions here, and he married a lady from Georgia. She passed away, and his second wife, Beulah, she's still living in Tulsa. And he was a brother of Mrs. Jim McBurney, whose husband was one of the first bankers in Douglas Commerce here. And he was also, McBurney was the director of pictures in my book. And Dr. Clinton was very prominent in all civic affairs. And when they had wrecks and catastrophes, he'd work day and night with them. And then here, had one thing here in Kapapa, a very bad wreck. And the hospital, of course, we just had little frame hospitals, you know.
What other individuals?
Oh, Mr. Music, who was invited to come and do an interview there. He came here in 98. He owns the Denver Village up here. He's a prescription man, has a drugstore, and he had done a lot of research and remembers it all. And he was taken care of part of the time when he was a little boy by this Lila Vinci, this missionary teacher. And he recorded lots of the Tulsa history, and he's been in the drugstore. He was in the old early Shackle drugstore here. And early on in the kid life, he worked on a ranch. He said sometime he rode a horse to a race event down around Broken Arrow, I think, and his horse won, and it was loaned to him by the man he worked for, and after it won the race, before he got home, somebody stole it. Yeah, but he said they had so many people out of the store on account of the flu, and he planned to come tonight. So that's what Dorothy told me. Well, of course, you know about Charlie Borger. I've known him since the year one. Well, of course, he's connected with the Chamber of Commerce for many years, and then, of course, on this Cathedral deal, you know all about that. Everybody that knows Charlie Borger knows that. He's got a nice wife named Rose, and she writes with children. And I don't know much else to say about him, except that I always think of him as either connection with the river navigation or with the Chamber of Commerce. Didn't you say so? Well, he's one of the oldest. It wasn't the oldest one. There was it's the oldest Tulsa shop. We came here in 16, and he retired, and my son and I run it the last 2 years. And one of the early singers in town was Richard Burkhart. They had a beautiful home on our side, and then the daughter ran his print shop later. But one of the things that stands out in my mind, and I, without my notes, I couldn't tell the exact date for the booster trips. They were really fun. Well, one, the very oldest one, the people went, they paid $100. They got a private car, and they had a printing press in it, and they printed their news people on the way. They got in Chicago, and they got on the floor with a band in the Board of Trade, and they had to stop the trade. They couldn't carry on. Somebody telephoned in and wanted to know what was the matter. There wasn't any news coming through, and they said, well, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Tulsa in the territory's got the floor. And they was very pain up there. I went on down to Louisville, and this Mr. Burkhart heard them, talked with them. So he came out and he started on the early print shop. And he published one of the first directories, the little woods directory.
My understanding of the time they stopped the board of trade, the real Rogers was and that he had.
Well, no, I didn't have that in my notes, but it could be.
I got it.
But we had several. We had more than one.
That's right. No, but it was the one where New York called. I got it from New York. And her husband.
Well,
this might be another story.
William Hicks and Judge Judson was the first one as well.
That's right. And Judge Judson was a young lawyer at the time they made their first trip. And Ms. Judson told me about this trip, and I
got the picture. See, that's what I had the picture.
That Will Rogers, she said, made this trip where Tulsa is, which is answering the New York Board of Trade. And I confirmed that with John Mayer because he had made a later one.
I think we had three on the day.
Yeah.
That happened before I came to take it.
John Mayo, the one he told about, was the one that was made right after Tulsa. They went to a later
And that's when Mr. Burkhart came, and he went in the printing business all these years, and his daughter carried on up until about, I guess 2 years ago. She sold out and went into marine supplies on the side of Puerto Rico people.
This good year for us, and then we'll be in the Tulsa.
That's good. Well, she's been here. She's been for 5 years. She thought I was home there. Her old home is just 2 blocks from where I live, so she's done all right. Well,
She's standing in there.
yes, and she does lots of reading. She likes the reading and late making. I know, she uses out there. I talked to her a couple days ago. I know, she took a printing course, and I finished printing deal. I started by administration.
You think of anything else? We've had a good interview. You. Oh, you're here now.
Well, I don't know.
You have to do it yourself.
Well, one of the other printers in town, Jimmy Cockle, was represented the printing industry on the national board for a number of years. My husband was president of the Tulsa Printers Association, and my son was. Now they have offices in Oklahoma City. There are a lot of players with all the printers and printing industry.
Anything else? It's been a wonderful interview, Miss Miss. And this, this interview is J.O. I want to be sure it's correct. J.O. Julius Option Miss. And we are looking forward to your book coming out. One, two, three, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We are interviewing today Mrs. Bertie Gilbert from the city of Tulsa and Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Miss Gilbert is a long-time resident of Oklahoma, and I'm sure she will relate a lot of history to it. Mrs. Gilbert, let us begin this interview. She is today given by James Katigan for the Oklahoma Living Legends, Oklahoma Christian College. Ms. Gilbert, when did you first come to Oklahoma?
I come to Oklahoma, to Cathedral, October the 27th, 1907. I was born in Arkansas, Carroll County, in 1983. I come here with my mother and father, 7 brothers and 7 sisters. 7 brothers and sisters. I'm going to get it all mixed up. Traveled. You can do that. Traveled 12 miles from Katigan in the edge of the Burgess Bottom in Springtown vicinity, west of Lock and Dam, number 18. The bottom was a wilderness at that time. A man could not ride through if he did not go a cattle trail. My father was John U. Norris. He was a farmer, trapper, hunter. He farmed for Gentry, Cherokee, and Nancy the first year, and hunted and picked up pecans for a living. He had a string of hounds and traps. In 1925, he was Oklahoma's champion trapper. We could go in the river bottom, kill wild hogs for our meat. Nancy Cherokee told me to go and dig sweet auntie roots to put in the lodge to give a sweet smell. We went on the Adams Creek and dug it. My father carried the first ballot box
to our house and held election, first election that was held in Adams Creek Township. The election is now held in Conference Schoolhouse. He was a Democrat. 6 years later, I married John L. Gilbert. We drove to Tulsa in a 2-seated Surrey, pulled by 2 mules, on November the 30th, 1912. Settled in the Conference community, lived there 42 years. We were farmers. Broken Arrow was our trading post. At that time, Broken Arrow had no street. I have saw wagons bogged down on Main Street. We farmed cotton mostly, raised hogs and cattle. We come to Oklahoma in 1901, settled on Adams Creek. Have 2 sons, one with American Airlines, O.J. Gilbert, of Los Angeles, California. Eugene Gilbert with the Corps of Engineers in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They graduated from Broken Arrow High School and then went to TU. I've belonged to the Farm Extension Club 52 years, still attend. My husband belonged to an organized band called the Anti-Horse Thief Organization. Cathedral was a very wild place, 2 or 3 killed in a week. The young people of today are not much worse than men. More of them, and word can get around faster with telephone and TV. Long hair and beard don't mean anything. The men wore mustache and the girls bangs. I heard of no drugs, but certainly was plenty of liquor, and it was against the law. Was shipped into Cathedral. I know one woman made a trip every week there, and it certainly was unlawful. There was a boy, Floyd Jones, got his throat cut just below our house. A Childers and a McCullough in 1915 killed him. One held his hands around a tree, the other cut his throat, and gambling was the men's pastime. They was drunk and gambling, both men, when they done it. They both died in McAllister prison. No schools at that time. When I was 5 years old, we come to Grove, Oklahoma, in a wagon train. There were no schools.
Mrs. Gilbert, during this time, your first experience here in Oklahoma, what did you have to overcome, and what obstacles were in your way to obtain some schooling?
Well, my dad got a big wooden box and brought it home from town and fixed some benches in it and hired a woman to teach my sister Willard and I. And we went to school every morning in this big box. We stayed at Grove, Oklahoma a year after that and went back to Arkansas and stayed till I was 10. Come back to Grove and then come on down to Cathedral. My father was an old-time fiddler, played for all the dances, square dances. Nancy Shilaki also rode with Belle Starr. My father and my husband, after I were married, made caskets because the mud and winter was so bad that they couldn't get into town to get them. And I have lined caskets and fixed them for them.
Mrs. Gilbert, when you first arrived in Oklahoma, relate to us some of the happenings that
took place during this time, such as how you invested the transportation you arrived here in Oklahoma, and also the members of your family, like your sisters and brothers, and your mother and father. Tell us something about your first arrival in Oklahoma and your impression of all of it.
Well, I was 5 years old the first time when we come to Grove, Oklahoma. And I come in a wagon train with my mother and father and my mother's sister, Esther Katigan. She married while we were there. And she married Watt Powell. And they were my mother and my father and 2 sisters in our family. And I was the oldest child of John U. Norris. And he was born and raised in Arkansas and was a hunter there also. And when we come to Oklahoma, we come in this wagon train with another family by the name of Underwood. And 2 or 3 nights after we left Arkansas was on the way, and the roads were terrible. We couldn't hardly get through. And we crossed the White River, and it was really scary. I was just 5 years old, and it almost scared me to death. And we traveled on and got to our camping place that night, and there were 2 grown boys in this other wagon, and they got into a fight. And one of them busted a cedar bucket over the other's head, and my aunt took me and my other sister and run off in the bushes while they got them settled. Then, when we come to Southwest City, Missouri, and we stopped there and bought feed for our horses. And we drove on out, and I'd always been scared of Indians, although I have a little Indian blood in me. And I thought we'd be scalped, is what I thought. And so, sure enough, we went on out of Southwest City and camped for dinner. And there were some Indians come up on little ponies with moccasins on. And they told my dad, says, you went in our field and got corn for your horses. And he told them, no, he didn't. He stopped in Southwest City. And they said, oh, yes, you did. And he says, if you don't pay us for it, says, we'll go back and get a pot. And so my dad took out a silver dollar, I'll never forget it, and held it up, and they said, yes, that'd be all right. And they took the silver dollar and went off a-hooping and a-hollering. So we drove on in to Grove then and got settled, and I was a really happy little girl to get off of that trip.
Mr. Gilbert, you understand that some of your ancestors came to this part of the country with the sailors too. Can you give us some background on that? And since you're Indian descent, did you have much difficulty in getting on the Indian road during this time?
My father, great-grandfather, come on, I think, on the Trail of Tears. And they come to Arkansas long before Arkansas became statehood. And when Oklahoma they allotted the land to Oklahoma. Why, he come, my father did, to put myself and my sister Willard and my sister Nellie on the road. And I don't know whether he put us on the road or not, but anyhow, he went to Paul's Valley, Oklahoma, and worked and got money to come back to Arkansas on. And when they pulled up on the land, he couldn't get money to come back, to pull up. So that left us out. And when he come back from Paul's Valley, he had his hair long like the Indians wore it, and braided in real long black braids. And us kids didn't know what to think of that when he come back. But I have a little bit. It's not much, but I have a little bit of Indian blood. Cherokee.
Now, I'm going to get Mr. Gilbert. During the early days, you had been as a member of the Anti-Horse Thief Association. Must have quite a few experiences to do with the association and convention. I wonder if you can bring us up on some of the goings on at this time.
Well, the first time he ever come to see me, before we were married, he brought his picture, and he had been to this Anti-Horse Thief Association. And I have the picture and also the ribbon that they pinned on his coat. And it was in 1910. And the reason why they organized this Anti-Horse Thief Association was because that the good horses, they couldn't keep them. People would come in at night and keep them and ride them clear out of the country. And at that time, a horse could go pretty fast and get away in a night. And they would take them out and sell them as valuable. And that is about all I know about Horse Thief Association.
Mr. Gilbert, you have a lot of experience with northeastern Oklahoma and central Oklahoma, dating way back. We would like to hear, why don't you give us some of your impressions on early days on the farm in Wagner County, and also what you and other members of your family had to go through in order to secure an education in comparison to what the children of today have in the way of education.
Well, we were cotton farmers, and it was a pretty hard life. We would pick our cotton and take it to Broken Arrow and pay our bills, and when we get it and paid, we wouldn't have very much left to live on. And my husband worked hard, and I worked hard with him. I believe in a husband and a wife that take going hand in hand in anything that they do. And our children had a real hard time of getting their education, too. And my husband introduced the first peanut that is raised in Wagner County. Mr. Bob Jeffries was the county agent at that time, and he took a lot of pictures of us that was in the farm paper, and shocking. And my husband really knew how to shock the peanuts to make them look bright and pretty when they went to threshing. They said he really knew how to take care of them. And education, I wish the boys and girls of today knew how hard it was out in life to get to a college or a high school. My boy, my oldest one, O.J., he would go to high school. He'd walk as far as 5 miles to catch the bus. The roads were so bad and so muddy that the bus couldn't get through, so they would call out, and he would meet them wherever they could get. And at times he had to stay with a family close to the Broken Arrow by the name of Rafferty. Harold Rafferty was his buddy, and he would stay there, and if he didn't have enough money to buy his lunch, Mr. Rafferty would give him money to eat on until he could get back home to get his money. So boys and girls, take advantage of everything you can and get education, for that is what counts in life. I know, because I didn't have any. I had to work in the cotton fields and take care of 7 children smaller than me and never had any education. So I feel inferiority about not having an education. But thank God I've stood the test and had a wonderful life.
Mrs. Gilbert, in these early days, how did you arrive, or how did you manage to get to church, and what part did you play in bringing religion to your part of the youth in your county, and what did you remember as in your family taking care of the religious process?
Well, there was a lady come from Wagner by the name of Hopkins, and she started a Sunday school in springtime, and we went there for a long, long time to Sunday school, and we studied the New Testament. That's the literature we had. And I met my husband at Sunday school, and he gave me a testament. I still have the testament, and that was in 1910, I believe. And then this lady got a preacher to come in from by the name of Peters, and he had a revival. And my mother, when she went to die, they had called me to her bed, and she looked up and saw me, and she says, "Oh, Bertie, raise my little children up to meet me." And it made me think that there was a higher power, and that I should get right with the Lord. And I did. I went to the revival, and I got saved when I was 18 years old. And I'm not sorry to say that I worked very hard for our Lord all these years. And then when we moved in the Compton vicinity, why, we had church services in it, and we worked hard to keep a little service going, and it was undenominational at Conklin. But at Springtown, it was Baptist.
Mrs. Gilbert, I know from your experiences that you have related to us here that you must have quite a background on the remembrance of what we went through and what you and your family went through during World War I and II.
I certainly do. I'll never forget that. In World War I worked in the bomb drive. We had a sale. Bluford Patrick of Cathedral, Oklahoma, had a sale, and we women worked hard to have serve lunch there. It is all turned over to the bomb drive, and Mr. Bluford Patrick gave us a pig. We put that up and sold it. I don't remember what it brought, but it run way up there, and then the man that bought it, he gave it back to us, and we put it up, and he sold a second time. And I was young men, and I had Victory Garden. I had a Victory Garden for 3 years. I have the certificates now in good shape that I'm very proud of. And I've also got my 50-year gold pin from Wagner County Extension Club. They were only 6 women in Wagner County that got it, and I was one of them, which made me very happy to know that I had worked to help benefit somebody else. And my oldest boy was in 4-H, and I worked very hard helping him with all of his plans. And in World War II, we had to raise our own food, and we had molasses mill, and I learned to use molasses in everything instead of sugar. And I can make real good gingerbread yet. And I really enjoyed the work. Have always enjoyed helping someone else. And we couldn't get gas to keep our little Sunday school and things going, so I walked 2.5 miles Sunday morning and back in order to keep our little Sunday school going. Then finally we got a little more gas, and there was a lady by the name of Mrs. Berry come in, and we kept our church going in that community, which I'm very thankful. But I'm sorry to say it's not going now. But I hope to see someday a big church built in the Conklin community.
Mary Gilbert, would you give us your age at this time and also your residence?
I'm Bertie Norris Gilbert, and I live at 410 East Broadway, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. And my age is 78 years. And I'm happy to be an Oklahomian.
We have just completed a very pleasant interview with Bertie Norris Gilbert in the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, from the library in the city center. The interviewer has been James Katigan for the Oklahoma Living Legends of the Oklahoma Christian College. On this date, January the 17th, 1972.
This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. The date is January the 17th, 1972. We're in Tulsa at the Oklahoma the Tulsa Historical Society area at the Tulsa City County Libraries, and I'm visiting with Mrs. J.O. Mish. I want to get that, Fannie, Fannie B. Brownlee Mish, and Mish is spelled M-I-S-C-H. To start with, I want to find out where you were born and how you came, who your parents were, and how you came to Oklahoma.
I came to Kansas, to Parsons, Kansas, in 1904 with my parents, Edward and Rosella Brownlee, from Nottoway, Iowa. And I went to school in Kansas, was married in Kansas in 1909, but before that, when I taught school.
Yeah. Well, now you taught school in the Panhandle of Oklahoma,
Panhandle of Texas and in Kansas.
Yeah, Texas and Kansas.
South Mount, Kansas, and Clarendon, Texas.
Your first book that you wrote, we'll be talking a little about the book you've written and what you're writing now, but the first book you wrote was dealt with teaching in the Panhandle of Texas.
Yes, that was Teachers on Horseback.
Tell a little about that book.
Well, it started out very recently in Iowa, and then as a young woman, and then into Kansas, where I taught school, and then we decided another friend of mine decided we'd go to the Panhandle of Texas and how to school if there was one vacant, and so we wrote to the county judge. They didn't have a superintendent in those days, and he said, come on and head school. So a young man was brought out to our home by his aunt, and her husband was a doctor, and said, would you take Willie along? Well, of course, thought we were growing up. We were about 18 years old, and so he said, yes, we'd take him along. So we went on the train with great big trunks, and we were out there a year, and it was a great experience.
Where was it?
I lived on a ranch about 20 miles out of Clarendon, Texas, and my friend lived in a dugout over on Fish Creek. But since the boy was younger than we were, we let him have the one closest to town. He was only 10 miles out. We rode horseback to town on Saturday for the mail.
How far was the train?
Well, it was a one-room schoolhouse, and I drove 5 miles to school from the ranch and took the little boy along with me, and we took a 5-gallon jug of water because, of course, we had no well. And when it got down to 30 below, people wouldn't send me to go to school because he said none of the kids would be there either.
What year was that you taught?
1908 and 9.
1989. How far were you from the Oklahoma thing?
Well, I was southeast of Amarillo on the Fort Worth and Denver. To go out there, we went down to Denison and up the railroad, up to Fort Worth and Denver.
When did you first get to Oklahoma? Come to Oklahoma.
In 1910.
Did you come to Tulsa?
I didn't come to live. My parents had moved here temporarily, and I was down here, but my husband and I went into business here in 1916.
And this was the same business.
Printing and publishing.
The name of it was?
Tulsa Printing.
You mentioned printing and publishing. Of course, this publishing is an interesting thing. What were some of the books that you all published in the early days?
Oh, we published the 14 Forts of Oklahoma and Soto magazines, and the Soto book, First White Settlement of Salina. We published that several years ago before I published this one. And log books for flyers, various kinds.
Why don't you describe the printing operation in 1916? What it was like? What sort of equipment you had and how you operated that time?
Well, we operated very much the same as what we would now. We were always a letterpress, and our place of business was at 219 East 3rd Street, and it was in the old Agnes building, which still stands, and it had wooden floors, and in order to hold the printing equipment and the presses, we had to put concrete reinforcements under the floors in that building. And then in 1922, we built a 3-story building at 514 South Detroit and moved our plant down there in one of the rooms.
Did you remain letterpress?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever take one off set? Or did you
No, always letterpress. Always letterpress.
If you were going to business now, wouldn't you go into offset?
Perhaps partly. I have a grandson in the business at Fulton, Missouri, and they're going into offset. They had been all letterpress, and he says that that's the thing to do. But where my son works, they all have they have both.
Most of them do now.
Mm-hmm. And some of them have all offsets, you see it. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
The book that you wrote that we wanted to discuss a little was the book Methodist Trails.
That's in England.
Why don't you, of course, the thing that we are most interested in is the Oklahoma portion.
Well, that's
that you want to delve into.
Well,
why don't you talk a little about that?
Well, this book, there's 145 pages, and there's 65 photographs, and the tale starts in England with John Wesley and his mother, and they started the Christ Church, called the Holy Club in England, and they were made fun of, and then eventually he was sorry for the people in prison and all the debtors over there, and he came here with Oglethorpe when Oglethorpe came in 1703, and George Whitefield came with them, but Wesley didn't stay indefinitely, and they went back to England, and the Methodist Church, though, was established then at that point. It was grew from that. Other people, the Methodists, came over. It said the institutions of Methodism grew like a tall palm, and the episcopal system grew as noiselessly. And I'll go on to the 5 tribes in the southeast. The Creek Indians were the first settlers which Oglethorpe found when they came there, and Tamatiki, the Creek chief, welcomed them, and they helped him establish the colony around Savannah. Anyway, the missionaries came, and the Mississippi Conference sent missionaries to the Chickasaws and Choctaws, Creek, Cherokees. And I go into detail, of course, in the book, which is more particularly of interest to the first people. I'll just skip along here. The first Asbury mission was at Norfolk Town in 1848, and the Norfolk Town was a forerunner of Eufaula. When the Methodist trails reached Tulsa, it was in 1886, and a conference of Methodism was held at Topeka, Kansas in 85, October the 20th, 22, and it was a momentous occasion for Tulsa, Creek Nation Indian Territory. And at that time, Tulsa and Red Fork were added as new mission fields, as well as were Red Rock, Bartlesville, Red Jacket, Ponca, Otto, and call agencies. Church stations already working were one church and parsonage at Weinbach, stations at Snow Creek, and one at Panther Creek, Sunday schools at these churches, and stations with Sunday schools only, total seven. In December 1886, the first Methodist Episcopal Church was organized in Tulsa Town, and this was the first church ever built in Tulsa. There was a Presbyterian mission was erected, and church services held there several years prior to that, about 1883, I believe, or 84, and but this church was organized with just a few Indians present, and Legis Perryman was the principal chief of the Creek Indians in this area at that time, and he was very cooperative. In fact, we paid $10 for occupancy right to the ground which the little church was built on, would be on North Main Street between Chairman and the Katy Railroad track, which at that time was called Duluth. The streets there are Brady, Chairman, and Duluth, and run alphabetically north. And it soon outgrew that location, and a location south.
What is the relationship, incidentally, of Legis Perryman to Mr. Perryman we met?
It's his grandfather, and he raised Homer. That's Homer. Homer's father was killed in his accident. Well, anyhow, the congregation decided, part of them, they split up. Some remained on the north side of town, the others came on the hill south of the railroad, which was at the northeast corner of Boulder and 6th Street. And at that time, this was an interesting thing, that in 1906, about the time this church was built, in 1905, or started, was when the Creek Indians was to hold their last council session in the historic Capitol in North Morgan. before terminating their tribal relations before statehood. And also, Tulsa was soon to have mail delivery, and the carrier would ring a cowbell when a patron had a letter. The Indian Republican stated that the cattlemen were cheerful, since grass all over the territory was excellent. They looked to the weatherman for relief and not to the government. When Reverend Abel came to occupy the church on April the 7th, 2nd, 1917, the Boston Avenue Church was to be invited to combine services during pastors and vacations. And 4 days after this board meeting on April the 6th, war was declared by President Woodrow Wilson. Tulsa County was swiftly mobilized. Captain LaRue opened a recruiting camp on the southeast corner of 4th and South Main, a vacant lot, later to be known as Liberty Square, where bombs were sold.
Now, we're getting into the area where you are here. You came here in 1916. Tell us about Reverend Abel, Dr. J.W. Abel. Tell us, not reading, but I just want you to tell about this person.
Well, he was known as the fighting pastor because he was out doing other things besides just church work. He cooperated. He belonged to the Kiwanis Club, and he soon saw that the church building, which he was then preaching, was going to have to be enlarged, which was impossible in that location, or else built farther out. And they bought a lot at 6th and Boulder, which is now the Court Arcade building. It was purchased by Mr. Aronson, who was a trustee of this library.
Yes,
And anyway,
why don't you tell us, I'm trying to get away from the book, more informal. I will go back to the book, though. Why don't you talk a little about what it was like at the time? Give us a little bit, in your own words and thoughts, of the tenor of thinking at the beginning of World War I. You were here.
Well, there was 500 boy reserves which were mobilized to work on the farms to relieve the boys, the soldier men in their services, and they had a big revival that year, and 500 new people joined the church in that little church.
Do you attribute any of that to the feeling, the war feeling, or some of the...
I think it was the expanding population, and between the groundbreaking and the entering of the new church location, a tragedy struck in Tulsa. Just at supper time on a pressed evening, the race riot was started.
Did you see any of that?
I didn't tell about myself. I lived pretty close.
Well, that's why it ought to be recorded, you know.
About supper time on a pleasant evening, May 31st, a disastrous racial war started, when 2 carloads of Negro men stopped by the courthouse to, reportedly, they said, to release a prisoner in the top floor of the courthouse. And they were all armed with shotguns. And it was just at the time that some of the stores were closing. It's very quiet over town. Some of the stores had closed. Well, of course, the citizens, white citizens, quickly armed. They broke into all the stores, took out all the ammunition, guns, hardware of all kinds, and the real battle started at the railroad station. Things didn't go in through here for 3 days. And of course, martial law was quickly declared, and the It was an engineer and a fireman killed in the cab on the train. That's why we stopped the train. And, of course, about 800 houses burned. And the Reverend Abel had them set up with the Red Cross came in there from quite a few towns to take over because, of course, so many people were burned up and their homes burned up. And it burned for days, 3 or 4 days. And, of course, martial law was declared. You had to lay on the floor. You couldn't lay in front of a window. But anyway, he set up a Red Cross station in our basement of that church. And the refugees and wounded were taken down there and cared for. And another thing that outside of the race riot that happened that is kind of interesting, especially in the present day, that Amos Hall was a janitor, and he lived in that basement, and he studied his law book. And he became a well-qualified Negro attorney here, and just recently died, perhaps in the last 2 or 3 months, and he was district court judge, I believe. Yes, he was a district court judge at the time of his death, but he got his start studying law in this church basement. And anyway, when the new church was started at 11th and Boulder, and we had this, we lived in the basement of the church for several years because it was quite a job, and it was finished under Dr. Skinner from New York, and Dr. Abel left. And when they marched down on that day, I was trying to think of oh yes, in this basement of this little church, they also, Reverend Abel had a Boy Scout meet in there. He did all sorts of things. And then in the race riot, he and our assistant pastor got on boxes in the street and shouted and begged and pled for quiet, you know, and this thing. And anyway,
Did you do any good?
well, I suppose it did some good, but of course they went on and left him, you know. And
I want to get back a little on Amos Hall. Wasn't Amos Hall the first Negro judge in Oklahoma? Am I correct or not?
well, Ben Hill, you know, he just died lately, and he was a legislator.
He was a legislator. But wasn't Hall the first?
Well, I'm not sure about that. He's the first one I remember about.
You knew him, apparently.
I talked to him on the phone when I wrote this book.
Oh,
But I didn't.
Not well acquainted.
I wasn't well acquainted with him, but a friend of mine was his court reporter. She lives in Chicago, but she works over here. And anyway, the 2 rooms in this lower level auditorium, this little church, seated 1,600. And I was going to say that when this I want to turn here because I want to get it correct here. Let's see. It's about the war. Anyway, it's interesting about this war. The entire football team, am I still on? The entire football team at Penn College enlisted at one time as students from Central High and businessmen, and E.W. Sinclair gave $10,000 to rebuild buildings at the fairgrounds to house these men, which became Camp Sinclair. And the Oklahoma Ambulance Company was to be a part of the Santa Fe train in the Rainbow Division. And anyway, that's what I was looking for. On Sunday morning, May the 31st, 1918, the Wesley Sunday School class, of which I and my husband were members, of 250 members, were assembled in the balcony seats. Ralph Kisser, the teacher, solemnly announced that on March the 29th, Good Friday, Big Bertha, the long-range cannon of the Germans, had fired on Paris from the hill 75 miles distant. Members were stunned at first, then dropped to their knees to pray. 86 young men from Tulsa First Methodist Church were in service, and many over there. The German attacks lasted till July every 3 days, which brought them once more to the Marne. When Armistice Day came on November 11th, that fall, the First Church had 3 casualties: George Rowe, Carol Morford, and Lee Gillister. And after the close of the war, in spite of all the hardships, this little church gave $68,000 to the centenary missionary campaign. Now then, they sold the property, and after this other deal, we went right. The last service held on the Fifth Street Church was Sunday of Thanksgiving week, 1921. December 4th arrived. To many Tulsans, it was just a pleasant winter day on a quiet Sunday morning. To First Methodist folks, it was the great day. The large congregation gathered early at the red brick church to cast looks of nostalgia at the pretty windows and the tall spire for the last time. The official board, trustees, and other officers soon started the historical Methodist trail to the new First Church, Tulsa, marching 4 abreast, led by a jazz marching band playing stirring hymns. The singing was led by Homer Rodeheaver, soloist for the Billy Sunday revivals being held in Tulsa. Babes in arms and cradle roll registrants rode in buggies or cars the whole 6 blocks distance. And when we had the 75th anniversary, which I spent a year working on this book for, the Tulsa Police Department closed Boulder Avenue, and we went to that corner and made that historic march again in 61.
Were you there on the first one?
Oh, yeah.
You were there both.
Oh.
Why don't you talk about your experiences being in that march? Just that first one, not the second.
Well, of course, it was looking forward to something big. All the people in Tulsa at that time thought it was going to get bigger and better. There were some people, of course, who didn't think so. So we had outgrown the church. It was simply bursting at the seams and standing room only. And, of course, we run into the Depression with the Cathedral. And and in the little First Church, we had the first pipe organ in Tulsa. And it was moved to the lower level of the new church. But it was a wonderful experience because people had contributed heavily financially and worked hard to raise the funds to make this change.
You want to go on from there on this?
Well,
Why don't you tell us,
this church is called the Cathedral of the Southwest, and the place where it's located is called Cathedral Square, and on that square is the park, and the First Christian Church, and the First Methodist Church, and the Christian Science Church, and then you see, the First Methodist Episcopal Church that was established here, there was a break in Methodism in Civil War over the shooting of the Negroes. And so after about 48, there were no Methodist Episcopal churches here. until ours was the first one here.
Tell us, what is where did Boston Avenue come from?
They came about, they were established about 1893, I believe, and their location was on Boulder, up there just north of the tracks, about even where the old Mason Hall is, the South Dakota tracks. They had Sunday school, and their preacher lived in a dugout.
What was it called?
It was called Methodist Church South.
And it became Boston Avenue. That became
On Boston, and when we were in the brick church at Fifth and Boulder, the first Christian church was on the corner just north of it.
You're writing now a history of the Old Creek area and of early Tulsa, based mainly on its creek background, isn't that right?
Oh yes, it starts in the southeastern states. It starts back about 1500, some of it does, and then to the Indians in the southeastern states, and their cause for removal, and Granger Jackson and Jefferson. Mm-hmm. Some of them came over from Scotland way back there.
Yeah, okay,
Maybe I'm mistaken there.
no, you're right. I'm sure. I didn't realize that.
Well,
I didn't realize the book was thought like that.
well, it starts back with the settlers that came in with Oglethorpe. When Oglethorpe came in, and these Tamashiki met them and helped establish the colony. But then the book then goes back at the early history of some of the later settlers that were 1500. The book part itself don't start until with Oglethorpe, 1735.
Now, it includes the charioteers moving across.
Well, yes, of course there are a lot of charioteers, all the tribes, and all of them had more than one trail. But and then it extends into the Creek Nation, and of course it includes the white settlers, and includes some of the Cherokees still into it, Osages.
I mean, you could tell a little bit about the very early settlement of Tulsa, the early Creek, the original Creek, as your.
Well, it was settled in 1882 when the railroad came here, and the first winter, the men, it was about 10, I think. I have a picture of the tents the businessmen were in. The doctor had one tent, and the general store was another tent, and the boarding tent. But they couldn't go on and build because it came in about August. The first store was established in August of 82, and George Bullitt and his wife, and they hauled in a wagon their groceries down from Cathedral, Kansas. Most of the things were hauled in from Tulsa, Kansas, or down the river to Arlington up this way. And then they had a creek uprising called the Green Creek War, and they had a little civil war among themselves, and so they couldn't establish, it couldn't be any building until spring, and they lived in tents all winter. And then the man that fed furnished the supplies for the railroad, he built a store, and that was J.M. Hall. And now Bullock, he quickly went into the farming business. He didn't have his little store very long. That's why so many people.
Hall was the first permanent.
He was the first. Well, he and Arthur. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman that you talked to out here, Homer Perryman, his grandfather lived by a spring, which the location now is under the First Methodist Cathedral at Livingston Falls. There's Mr. Bullock. And the first church was held in that Brush Arbor. This was interpreted. See, these churches here all had to have interpreters. And we had two. We had a creek and an interpreter.
Now, although 1882 is the beginning of Tulsa here, this white settlement, of course, why don't you tell about the first Creek settlement?
Well, the Creeks came up here in 1848. They were down, that was the Perryman town. And they'd been down to Big Spring, northeast of Broken Arrow, and they had smallpox down there, so they moved out and came up and settled on the river up here. And there was the early Presbyterian mission established among the Creeks at Coweta, and they established a branch of that mission on this Tulsa Council ground site, which we're about to, the city is about to acquire a whole block with the council oak, and in 48. So there was a branch Presbyterian church here that early. That is, I don't know if there was a church building, but they probably held it under Bozarders or in the home. And Reverend Loomis, who was called the Christian commander at Fort Gibson, had been a missionary to China. He was the one who made that statement in his Kings and Indian Territory that they had this Presbyterian mission established here in 48. But of course they came up to this council ground and had their council meetings right after 28, because the first Creeks came out here in 28. They left Georgia in 27 and arrived here in February.
How did you become interested in the Creek?
Well, of course it's a Creek town, and we always knew it was. And there were creeks all around us. And I had lots of Indian friends. I had Osages and Creeks and Cherokee friends. And like I said in the introduction to my book, you couldn't exclude some of the other tribes out of the history of the Creeks. It'd be like writing a genealogical tree and leaving out all the in-laws.
Actually, what's now Tulsa is part Creek now, in part Cherokee.
And Osage, we fell over north. Yes, you see, the Cherokee line is right up here, 5th and North Main. And I have friends that I interviewed, and I knew their mother before she died, and they had a 10-story brick house, and they were Cherokees. And they cooked on the Creek side of the house and slept on the Cherokee side, right on the line.
You said a 10-story brick house?
A 10-room, I meant. I'm sorry.
So that's all right.
Mm-hmm. 10 rooms, and red brick, and it was just burned down about last year when some tramps got in 75.
I understand that the old hall and Archie's store was just recently put in. Isn't that right?
No.
The first permanent building. Which was this permanent building that was torn down about a year or so ago?
Oh, you're thinking about the rock building at first? Well, that was built by Bob Lynch. That was the first rock building, built in 94. See, these others were built earlier.
Tell about the Lynch store.
Well, the rock from that, I have a rock out on my front porch now that I salvaged to save, and I've also got a rock from the Asbury Mission. I went down there and tasted all that before it went under the East Full Dam. But anyway, the Lynch building was built by Colonel L.D. Lindsay. He was a captain in the Ohio Cavalry, and he came in the South Country. He went to Birmingham, and he came out here, did a lot of construction in this area, and that was his first building he built in Tulsa. And the Lynches had a frame building